Roger Taylor has been asked across 30 years whether Foreign Sand was written for Freddie Mercury. He has never said yes. He has never said no. He gives the person asking something that is not an answer and is also not a denial, a warmth, a pause, a half sentence that turns towards something else, and then he moves on. Every single time. For 30 years. This is not accident. Roger Taylor is not an evasive man. He is, by the consistent account of everyone who has interviewed him across the decades, one of the most directly expressive members of Queen, the one most likely to name a difficult thing, to acknowledge a conflict, to say what he actually thinks when other people in the room are still deciding whether to say it. His reticence about Foreign Sand is therefore not his natural mode. It is a specific decision made deliberately and maintained with a consistency that is, in itself, a form of communication. He will not say who it was for. He has never said who it was for. And the reason he will not say is the reason the song matters and the reason this story has been waiting for 30 years for someone to look at it directly. To understand Foreign Sand, you have to understand who Roger Taylor was in the 3 years between Freddie Mercury's death and the song's release. He was 42 years old when Freddie died in November 1991. He had known Freddie Mercury for 21 years. They had shared a stage and a studio and the specific sustained intimacy of a band that had been together through everything: the years of struggle, the years of global success, the hot space crisis, the Magic Tour, the Innuendo sessions. Roger Taylor had watched Freddie Mercury perform while knowing he was dying and had done it without anyone outside the inner circle, knowing that he was watching something that was also an ending. He had been in the control room at Mountain Studios. He had been at Nebworth. He had been in the room in 1991 when the end was close enough that the room itself knew it. And then, in November 1991, it was over. And Roger Taylor, who had always been the most externally expressive of the four, who had always processed things outward rather than inward, did not immediately make music about it. He waited 3 years. The 3 years between Freddie Mercury's death and the release of Foreign Sand were not entirely silent for Roger Taylor. He performed at the 1992 Freddie Mercury tribute concert at Wembley, the enormous show that Brian May and he had organized as the first public act of collective grief. 72,000 people in the stadium, the biggest names in rock on the stage. He gave interviews in that period. He spoke about Queen and about Freddie with the warmth and the directness that characterized him. He worked on music. But the specific thing, the private interior processing of what he had lost, did not surface in his public work with the immediacy that might have been expected from a man of his temperament. The grief was present. It was visible to the people who knew him. But it did not become music for 3 years. And when it became music, it became Foreign Sand. Not a tribute single, not a statement. A song on a solo album, released in 1994. With a title that gestures toward distance and displacement and the specific quality of being somewhere that is not where you belong. A song that Roger Taylor has spent 30 years not explaining. 3 years. That is the interval between losing the person and finding the music. For some people, that interval is a week. For some people, it is a decade. For Roger Taylor, it was 3 years. The interval is not the story. What the interval contains is the story. Foreign Sand is a slow, searching song, not the kind of music that Roger Taylor had built his public identity on. He was known as a drummer, as a showman, as the person whose physical energy powered Queen's live performances and whose specific exuberance was one of the defining textures of the band's public presence. Foreign Sand has none of that energy. It is still. It moves slowly and with a quality of sustained searching, the musical equivalent of looking for something you are not sure you are going to find. The lyrics circle around loss and distance and the specific feeling of being present in a world from which something essential has been removed. They do not name the person who is absent. They do not describe the relationship. They describe the space the absence has created, the specific negative shape of a life that has been there and is no longer there. Roger Taylor co-wrote the song with Yoshiki, the Japanese musician and composer, and recorded it as a duet. The collaboration itself is a form of the song's meaning. A man who has spent 20 years making music with one particular group of people, making something new with someone from a completely different world, in the specific way that grief sometimes pushes people toward unfamiliar territory because the familiar territory is too full of what is gone. The public record of the relationship between Roger Taylor and Freddie Mercury tends to present it as one of professional closeness and personal warmth. Two members of a successful band who respected and liked each other across 20 years. This is true, and it is also a significant understatement of what was actually there. Roger Taylor and Freddie Mercury had a specific and irreplaceable quality of creative argument, a sustained dynamic in which Roger's instinct for the direct, the physical, the rhythmically immediate came into productive collision with Freddie's instinct for the theatrical, the orchestral, the emotionally complex. The hot space argument was one expression of this. The synthesizer argument was another. But the argument was always creative rather than destructive, because both men understood that the friction between them produced something that neither of them could produce alone. Roger Taylor has described Freddie Mercury in various interviews across the years with the specific vocabulary of someone who understood a person from the inside, not just what they were like, but why they were like that. He understood Freddie's exhibitionism as a specific form of communication, not vanity. He understood Freddie's privacy as a specific form of self-protection, not evasion. That level of understanding takes 20 years and does not end when the person dies. Roger Taylor said in one interview given in the period around Foreign Sand's release that he had been trying to write something honest. That is all he said about the song's origin. Trying to write something honest. Think about what it means when a man who is always honest says he was trying for 3 years to find a way to write something honest about a specific thing. The 1992 Freddie Mercury tribute concert at Wembley was organized in the first months after Freddie's death by Brian May and Roger Taylor, the two surviving members of Queen who were most publicly active in the period immediately following. The concert was, by any measure, a success. 72,000 people, a global television audience in the tens of millions. A bill of performers that represented the full range of rock's relationship with Queen's catalog. Roger Taylor sat at his drum kit on that stage and played. He played behind Def Leppard and George Michael and David Bowie and Elizabeth Taylor's speech in the full rotation of what the night required. The performances that survived on film and in memory as the most emotionally charged moments of that concert are not the ones with the biggest names. They are the moments when you can see in Roger Taylor's face behind the drums or in Brian May's face at the microphone, the specific quality of someone doing something that is costing them something real. Roger Taylor has said about that night that it was the most difficult thing he had ever performed. Not technically, the most difficult thing he had ever had to be present for while being expected to perform. Roger Taylor's grief for Freddie Mercury had a specific quality that distinguished it from how the other members of Queen experienced their losses. Though all of them were real and all of them were significant, Roger Taylor's grief had a physical dimension that was consistent with who he was and how he had always processed things. He had always been the member of Queen most likely to express himself through his body, through the physical act of drumming, through his presence on stage, through the specific quality of energy that he brought to everything he did. When Freddie died, the avenue of physical expression that was most natural to Roger Taylor, performing with Queen, playing the music they had made together, became for a period something he could not go to in the same way. The stage that had always been the place where he processed things at full volume was also the place where Freddie Mercury was most vividly and most irreducibly absent. That specific complication, needing the music, and also the music being full of what was gone, is what the 3 years of waiting was made of. And what came out at the end of those 3 years, slowly and quietly, and without announcement, was Foreign Sand. The lyrics of Foreign Sand do not mention Freddie Mercury. They do not mention Queen. They do not mention death or loss in the direct vocabulary that a tribute song would use. What they do is describe a condition, the condition of searching for something in unfamiliar territory, of being somewhere that is not home, of looking for a presence that is located in a place the searcher cannot reach. The foreign sand of the title is the territory of loss itself, the specific country you inhabit when someone essential has gone, where the landscape is unfamiliar not because you have never been there, but because you have never been there without the person you are looking for. Roger Taylor built these images carefully and without explanation. He released them into the world and then declined, consistently and across 30 years, to explain what they pointed toward. The song is complete without the explanation. It is more complete with the knowledge of what the explanation would be. That is the specific quality of the silence he has maintained around it. Not that it hides something, but that it protects something. The way that all the silences in this story protect something. Crystal Taylor kept a secret for 30 years. Mary Austin closed a gate and kept it closed. Peter Freestone wrote a memoir that approached what happened and stepped back from the center of it. John Deacon left and never came back. And Roger Taylor wrote a song and refused to say who it was for. The silence is always a form of the love. In this story, it always has been. Brian May and Roger Taylor processed their grief for Freddie Mercury in ways that were, characteristically, completely different from each other. Brian May's grief was internal and sustained, and expressed itself in the work in the specific quality of emotional weight that characterizes everything he has made since 1991. In the way he speaks about Freddie in interviews with the careful precision of someone who has thought very hard about what they want to say and what they want to protect. Roger Taylor's grief was different, more physical, more immediate in some ways and more delayed in others, finding its expression not in the management of public statements, but in the private act of making music about something he would not then publicly explain. Both of these are valid ways of carrying a loss. Both of them are entirely consistent with the men who carried them. And both of them produce something. Brian May's sustained public engagement with Freddie's legacy and Roger Taylor's quiet, specific, unexplained song from 1994 that everyone who has heard it understands without being told what it means. The decision to record Foreign Sand with Yoshiki, the Japanese musician, founder of the rock band X-Japan, a figure from a completely different musical tradition and a completely different cultural context, is itself a form of the song's meaning that Roger Taylor has also declined to explain. What is knowable is that Yoshiki had experienced his own significant loss. The death of his friend and bandmate Hyde in 1998 would come later, but his relationship with grief as a creative material was already formed before Foreign Sand. The collaboration between Roger Taylor and Yoshiki was not a celebrity pairing for commercial purposes. It was two musicians finding a language together for something that their individual languages had not been adequate to express alone. Roger Taylor, who had spent 20 years making music with the same four people, going outside that closed circle to make something this specific and this personal, is itself a kind of statement. He could not make this with Queen. He could not make this with any of the people who had been inside the loss with him. He needed to make it with someone who was outside it, someone who could hear the music without already knowing what the music was about. Roger Taylor has never performed Foreign Sand at a Queen concert. He has never played it as part of any Queen tribute or anniversary event. The song exists entirely outside the Queen world on a solo album, in a collaboration with a Japanese musician, in a context that has nothing to do with the band. This is not an accident. The song that was written for the person at the center of Queen cannot be performed in the space that person defined. That is the logic of the protection. Roger Taylor wrote Foreign Sand in 1994, 3 years after Freddie Mercury died. He has never said who it was for. He has never needed to. The people who have listened closely enough to understand what it is already know. The people who have not are not the people it was written for. That is the specific economy of a song written as a private act and released into the world without instruction. It finds its own audience. The audience it finds is the one that needed it. 30 years on, the question has not changed and has not been answered, and will, in all likelihood, not be answered in Roger Taylor's lifetime. He made something honest in the only way he could without a name, without an explanation, without the act of public grief that would have turned a private thing into a public one. He is not the first person in this story to do that. He is not the last. The silence is the form the love takes when the love is too specific to be named without reducing it. Roger Taylor wrote a song. He has never said who it was for. 30 years of silence. That is the answer.